Thanks for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels, FPAN's web series featuring conversations with archaeologists. Today we're joined with Sarah Herr. Would you like to introduce yourself and your mug?
Hi, I'm Sarah Herr. I'm president of Desert Archaeology, contract cultural resource management firm in Tucson, Arizona. And I'm bringing to you my mug, which is, this is my favorite mug, but I don't use it very much. It's from Bryn Mawr College. It's from when I was an undergrad. And this is an all-women's college outside of Philadelphia. And we're thinking about Philadelphia a lot today. The college was known for its Gothic buildings, and it always had tea for the women undergraduates back then. I don't know if they still do. And so the Alumni Association gave us mugs, and it also had a good honor code there. So we always agreed it was tea that was in the mug. It was never vodka. It was never beer. It was tea in the teacup. And so the cup comes with a lot of great memories. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually don't know if I've shown this mug. I've made the joke, so I'm running out, but I have this awesome narwhal mug.
Nice.
For today, but I just absolutely love the molded handle and the gilding work, and it's just a little extra, so I'm feeling a little extra today. So we'll get started.
Yeah, and you can drink out of your narwhal mug.
I know, I can. I'm very excited about this mug. And I will say I actually have iced coffee in the mug, which makes no sense, but it got back up to 85 today, so I'm like, nah, I think I need some beverages.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify that there's not vodka and beer in this today.
I mean, it would be completely justifiable if there were. So to get started, how did you get into archaeology, or why?
I got into archaeology, I think, because I felt like I was sort of born to it. I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and this is a city like, I think a little bit like St. Augustine, maybe in Florida. One of those cities that's so very old in terms of the colonial history of America, that you're just surrounded by history everywhere you go. And Santa Fe itself is a city that's in the midst of the pueblos of the Rio Grande River, and it has a conquistador history for the Spanish as well as an American history, and so it's this tricultural city. And so just everywhere I went throughout my childhood, I was sort of surrounded by there were Native American Puebloan jewelers and artists who sat on the plaza around, so whenever I was downtown Santa Fe, there were the people with a deep history of the land around me. The conquistador theme was very, very big back then, with festivals related to the conquest and the revolts as well, and the area is surrounded by national parks. And so I just I think I felt like it was, this immersion into history. And so some sort of curiosity about who I am was part of that landscape. And I just became interested in archaeology, even if I'm not descended from those peoples. It was so much embedded in like my childhood and who I was. But I've always sort of wondered how not everybody else became archaeologists when they were from Santa Fe. Like, how did you become a computer scientist when you were immersed in the same environment? And then I went to college. When I went to Bryn Mawr, I thought I would, study the Aegean and the Mesopotamian, archaeology, but the Southwest drew me back, and I came to grad school in Arizona and just have loved it ever since. So those original questions have stuck with me.
Yeah, no, I could not imagine growing up in New Mexico. I did my original field schools in New Mexico and Taos. So being out there every summer for 3 years was just this whole other, I don't know, just joy and different type of history, because I'm from Pennsylvania originally. So the two regions, I can completely understand how you just become that archaeologist. There's just something about the culture, and the history is just right there for you.
Yeah, and it feels like it's sort of, I know it's transformed, but it feels very preserved in these northern New Mexico landscapes like Taos. It's hard to be separate.
It is a land of enchantment. That's the slogan. That's the best way to describe it. So kind of same vibe. What is your current research?
So my current research isn't very much, because I became president of this company almost 4 years ago. So it's a little bit slowed down, but the research that when I get to do it, I've often been interested in areas between and on edges and, frontiers and boundary areas. And so the last research project, the one I'm supposed to be finishing up to writing in all that spare time, it started out, it's along this part of Arizona called the Mogollon Rim, that's right where the Colorado Plateau, which has all these Puebloan people, and the Four Corners archaeology that people know so well, it drops down into a riverine basin and range environment, and there's this big escarpment there, thousands of feet high, and people lived in that zone, the transition zone, but it's pretty sparse. And so I've been doing my work in that area. And when I started there, the maps, the culture area maps of Arizona had all these circles of culture areas, below me, above me, and like nothing there. It was the area that on the demographic maps, it had 0 people. And so since I'm drawn to these edges and boundaries, I was like, that's where I want to work. I want to do the study of humans in places that have no humans, apparently, the anthropology of zones that are very, empty. And, of course it wasn't empty. It was just somewhat invisible to most archaeologists. And I like this research because I think that a lot of my friends and peers like to do the core areas, because the archaeology is magnificent. The artifacts are often beautiful. You study strong institutions, you study politics and power and social organizations, and those are all really interesting in core areas. And I think I'm interested in individuals and change. And I find that if you look at the margins, you see where institutions fall away, and you see what's important, what important part of the core still remains at the very edge. And what choices are people making, and how are they surviving in these distances and stuff? And so when there's no people, but there's a lot of land in these land-rich, labor-poor environments, how does that transform social institutions? So those are the questions I like to play with in these areas, that have sort of fragile archaeology, very mobile people, things like that. So
they're very small questions, right?
Yeah,
They're some little ones. They're nothing like huge, overarching, really good research questions.
Well, I think I started my first fieldwork was a survey of a massive national park, just as the lowest person on the totem pole. And I think I've always learned to think at that landscape level. I think it totally melded my brain, and I can't think at a level of a single site anymore. It's like a landscape level, and so yeah.
We're actually going to flip-flop our normal flow of questions, because since we're talking about field work, what is your best, worst field story?
All right, well, this one my husband reminded me of a couple nights ago. I had sort of blocked it, apparently, but this is in the same kind of setting. So it's that same area of Arizona along the transition zone in Mogollon Rim, and I was a TA for my professor in grad school was Barbara Mills, who ran a field school project up there called the Silver Creek Field School off in East Central Arizona. And so I think when I was just starting my dissertation, she made me her assistant director of the field school so that it would look good on my CV, so that I'd be marketable when I grew up and all of that. So I'm the assistant director, and we usually at this field school, I'd done the field school for maybe 3 years before that. And we always had this great field trip that took 4 days, and we went to whatever national parks she wanted to show us that year. And so that year she did a lot of planning. She sent us up towards Flagstaff, Arizona, to that set of national parks, which has a volcano. It has some cliff ruins at Walnut Canyon. And we had a great plan, but she actually wasn't going to be there the whole time. She was on a NSF review panel for archaeology with John Yellen. So she left me in charge, but she'd planned everything. And so she goes away. And I think the morning she goes away to the airport, we drive off to our national monument. And we get out of the car, and one of the rangers comes up, and he's like, "Who's the leader of this project?" And it's me. And he's like, "Well, I've got to question you." And so I get taken into these administrative offices, and all these 20 students and TAs are looking around and not knowing what to do. So they go for a hike like they're supposed to. And I'm asked why we're stealing artifacts. And the ranger has gotten some tip off because we stayed the night before in the volcano's campground from some irate camper that we had been stealing artifacts. And so, this is just the start of this weekend. And so I'm interrogated. He doesn't believe me that we're not stealing artifacts. I say we're archaeologists. I say that this field school has a great reputation. when the students all come back, he has our cars line up out front, and he decides to do a search for artifacts. And so all our gear is taken out of our vehicles, and he starts like trying to go through our baggage to look for artifacts in like 8 cars or something like that. And it doesn't work very well, but in the end, everyone's upset. And like there's a guy from Chicago, a field school student, who's about to beat up the Ranger Rex, because we've never forgotten Ranger Rex. And then there's, people crying because they're worried that their career is now ended before it started. This is their first field school. So we get out of there, and I'm not quite sure, like, I guess they let us go. They just maybe kick us out, and I'm not sure what's supposed to happen. Barbara's going to come back, and we're supposed to go to a state park nearby, and we look at the map, and this doesn't, there's 2 roads in, so we pick one. Turns out that there's a really good road, but that's not the road we picked. We picked the bad road, but it wasn't apparent from the map because there was just 2 lines, one from the north and one from the south, and the car overheats. And so we're stuck there in the middle of nowhere for a while. The car, Big Mama, the Suburban, decides that she's going to be fussy, and so we never get to that state park either. By the end of when the car starts going again, everyone decides that they'd rather go to McDonald's than learn any more archaeology. And so I'm a big hero for taking people to the state park. In the meantime, we've been watching this fire over Flagstaff on the skies. It's turned the skies orange. And so we head back to our camp. We're done. And it turns out that our camp's on fire. And so we can't actually go back, but thankfully we have all our gear. Our camping gear. So we're evacuated to the high school gym, where we spend the night in the gym because we have no other place to stay. And the Red Cross has set up for people. And the students play basketball, and I'm trying desperately to get a hold of Barbara, who's in DC. And so I think somehow I've ended up with the phone number of John Yellen, who I call at midnight and wake up. So thankfully I've never needed another NSF grant. And he gets Barbara, and somehow we talk about the situation, and she has to finish her panel, but she'll be on a plane pretty soon. So anyway, I get a hold of her. We stay the night. The students play basketball all night long, as best I can tell. And then we're kicked out of the gym because we don't actually live in this area of Pinedale. So we have other homes. They're just in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Tucson, everywhere else. So the TAs are desperately trying to find housing. We realize we have $200 for food for 20 people. So we're feeding them cheese sandwiches and beer and things like that. And they're complaining about lack of meat. The students are complaining about lack of meat, but the TAs find another campground for us. I think there's a rescue of artifacts in the middle of the night, and our books. And then finally, I'm making a phone calls that I have something to do with the students on Monday Monday or Tuesday morning, I forget. And we go and visit another field school who takes pity and shows us their dig. So we have at least some educational moment here. And by the time we get back from our field trip, Barbara's back, and she's like, "Yep, the fire's out." And then we all go back to the camp. So that was the best worst. And it's a tale that was pretty abbreviated. I think it's made for tall tales and things like that. I think the other TAs have expanded on the drama of it over the years.
Field work in the Southwest is always interesting for the environment parts. In Florida, they camps when they do their field work. Normally people are very well situated in hotel rooms or college dorms.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little too hot and a little too buggy to be fully set up in a campground area for Florida. But we'll continue on. And our next question is, what is your favorite field tool? And you'll get bonus points if you have it.
My favorite field school?
Oh, field tool. Sorry, your favorite.
Field tool. Oh, field tool. Because I was going to say U of A, of course. My favorite field tool. So I realized these days I probably would just be handing you a paper clip or something. But so this is my clipboard, and I think this comes out of my survey days because because I ended up being a supervisor pretty quickly in my career, and so I don't have I have a great looking trowel, which I know you've probably seen hundreds of trowels already. But I think when I was a brand new volunteer, I always envied my crew chiefs for having their their enclosable clipboards that have all the stuff in them. And so I always this is my 3rd one, and the first one was aluminum, and it left you if you held it to yourself, you ended up with topo lines for your contours because the aluminum rubbed off on your body. So I started looking for plastic ones that didn't last as long, but they have the little angle protractors, and I've got a bunch of bags and my graph paper, which I to always have the really nice brand of green graph graph paper that's the nicest of all, that works with well with my scale, and there's like a mini scale in here and my photo thing. So this is my favorite because I can just pick up and go. And this one I'm still allowed to use a little bit, as even though I don't do much archaeology, because I go volunteer for a week every year on a like volunteer survey. So this actually still gets used, even if the line level doesn't get used as much anymore. So
yeah, that's it's a really good field toolkit. Oh my goodness, couldn't think of the word there. No one has brought up like the clipboards or like those types of everyday use. We've had people who like bring up like your own like these like kind of more subjective, sorry. They get a mouthful of cat hair. You can't tell. I wasn't home last, well, I got home last night from field work, so she has been very needy.
oh, left her.
No, she was left alone for like 24 hours. Oh my goodness. Don't even know what I was saying anymore. But for the field kits, we had a lot of different varying responses. I think maybe like only a handful of people said trowels as their like.
Oh, really?
I'll say I absolutely like, I have 2 clipboards depending on which projects I'm going on, and I'll just grab and go, and they have the different like notebooks inside, and the graph paper is so hard to find these days. You can't just
I know.
like special order, or if you do, it's in the English system. It's all inches instead of centimeters.
Nope, that's not acceptable. And yes, I think we have our local printing company actually print it for us. We just ask for it in like batches of 2,000 or something and have given them like, this must be protected.
That's smart.
Yeah. Well, I'm realizing how antiquated it makes me look because it's got the township range thing. It's got the UTM binder. Now I realize like a little handheld GPS, probably people don't need these tools anymore, but I loved my old tools for the 7.5-minute topo. So they sit here preserved. So.
And you'll never know when you actually end up needing them. Okay, I am just about to get a little too frustrated now. So we are on our technically second to last question, which is our last formal question, the big one. And that is how do you think that archaeology can help save the world?
So I think this is somewhat related to my my answer about coming from Santa Fe and that being an inherent part of me being an archaeologist. And I think for me the way I see it is that it helps give people identities in the world. And you see the world completely globalizing. You can go to almost any big capital city, any big city anywhere, and you see there's a Burger King and a Pizza Hut and the same clothing store. No matter where you are, like even if you cross oceans, you're seeing that stuff. My sister works overseas in Africa and still has Pizza Hut birthday parties for her kids. But I think that archaeology helps give like unique stories of places, and then like living here in the Sun Belt part of the United States. There's so many people who've moved in here, and I've moved in too, but longer ago than some, and so they don't know the history. They don't know the history of the places, and archaeology helps create those stories. And sometimes those stories are really embraced. And so Tucson's history that our company helped to learn, I didn't do the excavations myself, but some of my colleagues did, is that we have some of the oldest agricultural fields in the United States are in Tucson. And for 4,000 continuous years of farming on the banks of our little river, like you don't think of Tucson as water, but we have a little river through the town. And so there's been 4,000 years of people living here with various cultures passing through. And so that story has been really adopted by Tucson. And the place where you can see it is there's this place, right? There's a mountain called A Mountain. And so the University of Arizona's A is on the mountain, which is why it's A Mountain these days. It has a native name. It's also called Sentinel Peak. And that's where the water rises up because the mountain forces the water up. Otherwise, the water was underground most of the year. And so that's why there's like people have always been there in that place. And it used to be an oasis. Now it's a construction site. It's been a construction site. There's always something being torn down or built up there. But you can kind of like, if you stare at it long enough, you can imagine the water, you can imagine the mesquite bosques, and you can start to get this sense of place below your feet and start imagining this 4,000 years of farmers, Mexican, Chinese, Hohokam, earlier than Hohokam people. And so the story's been kind of embraced, and they variously try and find ways to interpret it. And I guess it's gotten out into the newspapers and magazines. So when people move in, they learn it. And I realized that it really had permeated beyond the archaeological community when I was at my doctor's office a couple years ago. And I was like, wearing that paper napkin you have to wear when, it's super embarrassing, just wearing this thing that's like flimsier than a napkin. And my doctor's like, oh, you're an archaeologist, how exciting. Because I think we've all had that conversation with, just about everybody. And she said, did you know that like Tucson is 4,000 years old? And I was like, that's our company. So even in the doctors, when you're there in your paper towel, it's part of the story of Tucson. And I love that it's permeated at that level, and it gives people, a pride of place. And so that's I kind of think that that's what archaeology contributes, is making those unique places that people want to share. So that particular place really is, has created more stories, for Tucson than some of the other places. But they're increasingly finding ways to celebrate it too. Like they've started celebrating the farmers and the foods of the region as well, and they're developing that into the tourism industry out here as well. So.
That's awesome. And I really think it grounds people into their space. And Florida's, I kind of saying, everyone moves to Florida and they don't have that rich sense of kind of belonging. And so when people do begin to learn the history and the archaeology, as much as it takes a little while, people get very much attached to it. Like St. Augustine, it's like everyone's like, the Castillo is everyone's like second home. Like it's like, oh, St. Augustine, the Castillo. It's just like part of that landscape and just kind of builds. So I would agree. No, it's a great way to just help provide that deep-rooted sense of kind of belonging. And then our last, or like our bonus question is just what's keeping you sane right now during work from home and everything else that's happening?
So one of the things that's keeping me sane is, all the gyms closed down for COVID, and, and then, the worry accelerated even as the gyms closed down. So, as a worried person, I needed to go get my energy out somewhere. So I started walking around Tucson and, walking around its historic neighborhoods, trying to learn this place that I'm part of, that I know as an archaeologist, but I don't know necessarily as, I don't know all the, the architecture and the buildings. And at first I started, when we all went home at the beginning of COVID, there was people started, like the neighborhood started putting up messages to each other. Like everybody wasn't, they weren't going anywhere. People were saying, don't go more than a mile from your house. Like really, really shelter in place was at least the message that I think we were getting here. And so I would notice that, like, we have those saguaro cactuses, the ones with the big arms on them. People put a t-shirt on their saguaro cactus that says something like, be well or something. There'd be like little teddy bears on doors for that I guess was a New Zealand thing to make it bearable for children. And you'd see the neighborhoods doing little things and kind of speaking to each other. And so I thought, well, that's fun to see what Tucson is saying to itself and what's the heart of the community. And so through the beginning of that, there was all these messages for people of wellness, thanking the essential workers, thanking the hospital. Like there was a rooftop across from the hospital that had lights on it that said thank you, that was aimed at the hospital windows. But then as over the summer, like that kind of thank you-ness disappeared from Tucson. And so I started looking for the public art, and it turns out Tucson just has tons and tons of murals. And if people if they Google, Tucson and murals, you'll just find all kinds of news stories these days. And so I started searching out the public art and that as a community, because I noticed there was all these beautiful women murals, and I like these women as goddesses, and the agave goddess woman is not very far from my house. And these were proliferating over Tucson. And so I started like hunting for murals, and that became what I did on every night after work, or on weekends I'd get on my bike and look longer for murals. And so this kind of like hunting for what Tucson's saying to itself and how it's representing itself became my way to kind of get through the mural. And so I like post one a day on my Facebook page, just one mural. Keeps me motivated. I've got to keep coming up with at least 7 a week or something like that. And so I'm wearing a t-shirt from one of these murals, and I don't know if you can see this, but it's a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and she's got the coronavirus mask on. So clearly this was painted this year, right downtown, and she absolutely glows, not on my shirt, but the actual original mural was a new one this year. Yeah, anyway, searching for these things and seeing how we're now talking about each other is part of what I think is keeping me sane. And it's like a scavenger hunt to kind of find these new things.
It sounds like it'd make a really great coffee table book, like to be able to look through and see like the changing history of the murals and what comes into play. Like sounds very beautiful. Or even
Yeah,
like,
I'm not a good, I'm not such a good photographer, but actually one guy at work taught me, because murals are hard to photograph because they're so giant.
yeah.
And so he taught me how to do taking photos like photogrammetry, so we can now put them back together. So we've done this one as a photogrammetry one, so that we can have her actually look good instead of my crappy, poorly angled one where I'm standing in the middle of the street and hoping a car doesn't run me over, but that's the best angle to get her. So we've got a better one than that now.
It sounds like a good project to keep you sane. But that was our last question. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Tea and Trowels. Thank you also for dealing with my cat being very much in the way. She's now just sleeping on me with her claws dug into my thigh.
Oh, nice.
Hope
Your own personal timer.
Exactly. So thank you again. Hope to see you. Hope to see you at some point to be able to physically meet you one day at some sort of conference.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Tune in next time on our next episode of Tea and Trowels. And cheers.